Ever wonder why sometimes it feels like financial markets, like they have a mind of their own?
Yeah.
Well, get this. Today we are doing a deep dive into the world of financial derivatives,
Okay.
but not in the way you might expect.
All right.
We are going to be blending cutting-edge theories of consciousness and artificial intelligence to understand how these, powerful financial tools work
Right.
and what they reveal about the human mind itself.
Wow,
Buckle up.
that's a fascinating connection. It might seem like a stretch at first.
Yeah,
We often think of finance as this cold and calculating world,
right.
but in reality, it's driven by human decisions, perceptions of risk, and sometimes even, irrational behavior.
Totally. And you've given us a fascinating mix of sources to unpack this. Deep dives on synthetic intelligence, consciousness, reports linking derivatives to complexity science, crisis management, and for a more digestible take, a surprisingly witty visual guide called Let's Talk About Derivatives.
Oh, I like that one.
Yeah, where should we start?
Let's start by looking at Josha Bach's work on artificial intelligence,
Okay,
specifically his principles of synthetic intelligence.
okay.
His micro-PSI concept might hold the key to understanding the link between our brains and financial markets.
Okay, so let's unpack this micro-PSI concept. It sounds pretty complex.
Yeah, so imagine each of those little AI agents as a trader on Wall Street,
Okay.
constantly scanning for information, making bets, trying to stay ahead of the game.
Right.
That's kind of what our brains are doing all the time, too,
Yeah.
just not always with dollar signs attached.
Yeah.
Bach's model shows how these AI agents make decisions based on drives and goals, constantly adapting to new information.
Okay.
Now, think about financial instruments like futures and options.
They're also all about managing future uncertainty, right?
Exactly.
Like, when we're trying to predict what's coming next, say, dodging a ball before it hits us.
Right.
Our brains are constantly trying to predict the future.
Exactly. And derivatives are essentially doing the same thing
Yeah.
on a much larger scale.
Right.
When we talk about, them being used for hedging or speculation, it's
Yeah.
kind of like those AI agents in Bach's model,
Yeah.
making bets on the future based on their programming,
Right.
which in the case of the markets is all the economic data swirling around.
Right. Right. So there's a parallel between how our brains use information to make predictions and how these financial instruments are used in the market.
Yes.
But it still feels like there's a missing link
Okay.
between artificial intelligence and, the very human world of finance.
And that's where Daniel Dennett's ideas about consciousness come in.
Okay.
He argues that there's no central self calling the shots in our minds.
Right.
Instead, it's more like a bunch of different processes, all competing for attention,
Okay.
with no single one in total control.
So you're saying our brains are like a decentralized, chaotic system.
Precisely. And guess what? The derivatives market is kind of the same way. There's no single entity controlling the market.
Right.
Its value emerges from the interactions of countless participants, each with their own motivations and strategies.
Okay.
It's like a giant interconnected web of micro decisions, just like the processes vying for dominance in our consciousness.
Wow.
Yeah. This idea of a decentralized system, it actually helps explain how things can go haywire.
Right.
Both in our minds and in the markets.
Yeah.
Remember the 2008 financial crisis?
Oh, how could we forget? That was a huge wake-up call for a lot of people, including, I'm guessing, a lot of financial experts.
It certainly was. And this is where Stephen Grossberg's work on the resonant brain becomes incredibly relevant.
Okay.
He argues that stable mental states, they arise from resonance between different areas of the brain.
Okay.
Think of it like an orchestra, right?
Right.
Playing in tune.
Yeah.
When all the instruments are in sync,
Yeah.
you get a beautiful harmony.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But when those instruments fall out of sync,
You get a resonance failure.
you get a resonance failure, right? So in the brain, that might look like a mental disorder, right?
Right.
And in the financial markets, it might look a lot like the 2008 crisis.
Exactly. That crisis, triggered in part by the misuse of complex derivatives,
Right?
showed what can happen when the normally stabilizing forces in a system fail to maintain that resonance.
Wow.
Those feedback loops, the risk management strategies, they all fell out of sync,
Yeah.
creating a cacophony of noise in the markets.
It's kind of eerie, right? How a theory about the brain can illuminate something as seemingly different as a financial meltdown, Makes you realize just how interconnected everything really is.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
And this brings us to our second report, which zooms out to give us an even wider view of this interconnectedness.
Okay.
Derivatives aren't just these isolated tools.
Right.
They're both products and drivers
Yeah.
of a giant complex system we call the global financial market.
So we need to start thinking about derivatives in the context of complexity science. Precisely. And one of the key takeaways from complexity science is the idea of the butterfly effect.
Right.
That a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil can eventually lead to a hurricane in Florida.
Okay, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
How does that apply to Wall Street?
In essence, it means that seemingly small events, or what the report calls tiny initiating events, or TIEs,
Okay.
can have massive, unpredictable consequences within complex systems.
Right.
In financial markets, this could be anything from a surprise earnings report to, well, you name it.
Like a global pandemic, we all saw how crazy things got when COVID hit.
Exactly. And that's why understanding derivatives alone isn't enough.
Right.
We need to understand how they interact with everything else in this interconnected web of risk and uncertainty. It's not just about the tools themselves,
Right.
but how they're used, how they're regulated, and how they can amplify those butterfly effects.
So where does that leave us? If we can't predict these like tiny initiating events and we can't fully control the complex system of the market, how do we even begin to manage the risks?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And this is where the concept of complexity leadership comes in.
Complexity leadership, that sounds intense.
Yeah.
What does a complexity leader even do? Like when the markets start going haywire?
It's less about having all the answers and more about fostering an environment of adaptation, collaboration, and constant learning.
Okay.
Think back to those AI agents from Back's work.
Right.
They thrive in environments where they can constantly adjust their strategies based on new information.
Okay.
Complexity leadership is about creating that same kind of agility within organizations.
So instead of freaking out and trying to control the uncontrollable, which never really works that well anyway,
Right.
it's about building systems that can roll with the punches, learn from mistakes, and adapt to whatever chaos the world throws at them.
Precisely. It's about shifting from a mindset of prediction and control to one of preparation and adaptation.
Right.
And in a way, this circles back to our own brains.
Okay.
Just like those AI agents, our minds are constantly adapting, learning, and trying to make sense of a world that's full of surprises.
So understanding how our brains work can actually help us become better leaders,
Absolutely.
especially in complex and unpredictable fields like finance.
Absolutely. By understanding the cognitive mechanisms underlying our own decision-making,
Right.
those biases, those blind spots, we can start to make more informed and less reactive choices, both in our personal lives and in those larger systems, we're a part of.
That actually makes a lot of sense. But before we get too deep into the psychology of decision-making, we haven't talked much about the visual guide you mentioned. Let's talk about derivatives. Does it offer any insights on managing risk or navigating this complexity?
It does, actually.
Yeah.
It offers some helpful grounding, I think.
While it doesn't delve into like the psychological depths we've been exploring,
Right.
it's great for like understanding the mechanics of these financial instruments
Yeah.
in a clear, concise way.
Right.
It's like having that friend
Yeah.
who can explain anything,
Yeah.
even potentially dull financial stuff,
Right.
and make it actually interesting.
That's a good way to put it. For example, it breaks down the different types of derivative, like futures, options, swaps,
Right.
in a way that's surprisingly engaging.
Yeah, and you're right. It doesn't like shy away from the complexity,
Right.
but it presents it in a way that's like digestible, even entertaining at times.
Right. It does a good job with that.
Yeah, which is really important because like we can't make informed decisions about something we don't understand.
Right.
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 But understanding the mechanics is only part of the equation.
Right.
What I'm taking away from all of this is that whether we're talking about, navigating the financial markets or just navigating our own lives,
Right.
being aware of these broader systems, those butterfly effects,
Yeah.
is becoming increasingly crucial.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's not about becoming experts in derivatives or artificial intelligence,
Right.
but about cultivating like a complexity mindset. It's
Right.
about acknowledging that we can't predict the future,
Right.
that there will always be unforeseen circumstances, tiny initiating events that can throw everything off course. But by understanding how complex systems operate,
Yeah,
by recognizing those echoes of our own cognitive processes in the chaos of the markets,
right.
we can become more adaptable, more resilient, and ultimately better equipped to handle whatever comes our way.
So it's less about trying to control the uncontrollable and more about learning to, like, surf those waves of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And maybe even learning to appreciate the ride a bit more, right?
Right.
Because let's face it, a little bit of uncertainty, a little bit of chaos, that's what keeps things interesting.
That's a great way to put it. And who knows, maybe by understanding those seemingly dry, complex financial instruments, those echoes of our own minds at work in the markets,
Right?
we'll gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
This has been quite a journey. It's amazing to see how these seemingly disparate fields, finance, consciousness, complexity science, all kind of intertwine to paint a more complete picture of how the world works.
Absolutely. And sometimes the most unexpected connections can lead to the most profound insights.
And on that note, dear listeners, we'll leave you with this.
Uh-huh.
What if mastering not just derivatives, but like life itself, hinges on understanding those fascinating, sometimes frustrating quirks of our own amazing, beautifully complex minds? Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.